The aliens were dying in droves under the ruthless onslaught, all hope torn away, until an unknown arrival of sleek black ships ripped through the void. In the Orion Arm, the primitive amphibious Keplerians fought a losing battle against the insectoid Lemnorians. The technologically outmatched Keplerians died in the thousands, their hulls shattered by antimatter missiles, bodies flash-frozen in the void as escape pods ruptured. The few remaining Keplerian plasma cannons sputtered out as the dreadnought Imperious Wrath glided through the defensive line. A scarred human mercenary named Ralph Perry watched the carnage from his cloaked ship. The alien's death screams and frantic pleas for aid filled his headset. His hand hovered over the gear stick, ready to punch the warp drive and run, when space itself tore open. Dozens of angular obsidian ships, bristling with strange weapons, poured from the massive wormhole. Ralph stared at their hulls, marked with the blue marble insignia he knew too well. The Terran Alliance had come. "This is Captain Aiko Tanaka of the TSF Yamato," a stern female voice broadcast on all channels. "Lemnorian vessels, stand down immediately and submit to Galactic Council authority." The Lemnorian Admiral Groose sneered his reply. "Pathetic humans, you have no power here. Leave now and I may let you live." The obsidian ships darted forward as the Lemnorian fleet opened fire. Ralph watched, awed, as the human vessels shrugged off the antimatter missiles like pinpricks. Beams of brilliant blue plasma lanced out, piercing Lemnorian shields to carve glowing scars across the dreadnought's thorax. The battle had shifted in an instant. The Terrans moved with purpose, devastating the Lemnorians with unimaginable weapons while shielding the remaining Keplerians. Ralph's shock turned to a savage grin. Against the Imperious Wrath and its fleet, even he had been hopeless. But now? As the dreadnought reeled, belching atmosphere from a dozen grievous wounds, he punched his engines to full. The time for running had passed. Humanity had a score to settle. Ralph's eyes stayed glued to the viewscreen as the Terran dropships descended through Kepler's atmosphere. The smooth black ships wove through fields of debris with impossible grace, the wreckage of Keplerian orbital platforms and Lemnorian warships, no obstacle to their approach. Ralph watched them land amidst the rubble of a once great city, now reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass. The dropship ramps lowered with a hiss, disgorging squads of human soldiers encased in sleek-powered armor. They moved with purpose, fanning out through the ruins, the glow of their helmet visors cutting through the smoke and dust. Ralph checked his own suit seals and grabbed his rifle. He had to see this up close. His ship touched down a respectful distance from the Terran command post, a cluster of prefab structures rising from the debris. Ralph approached slowly, a strip of white cloth tied to his rifle barrel. The Terran sentries watched him warily, their weapons not quite pointed in his direction. A towering figure in black armor detached from the command post and strode out to meet him. The soldier removed his helmet, revealing a grizzled face, all hard lines and cold eyes. "Colonel Marcus Steele, Terran Special Forces. State your business," he said, his voice like gravel. Ralph swallowed, suddenly feeling very small. "Name's Ralph Perry, independent mercenary. I've been watching you folks in action, and I gotta say I'm impressed. Thought you might be able to use a guide, someone who knows the local lay of the land." Steele regarded him silently for a long moment. "We could use a local expert," he said finally. "But this isn't just a cleanup operation. We're hunting the bastard responsible for this. Admiral Gruss. You help us bring him in to face justice, and you've got a deal." Ralph's eyes narrowed. Gruss. The mere name sent a surge of hatred through his veins. "Buddy, you just said the magic words. I've got a score to settle with that insectoid son of a bitch. You point me in his direction, and I'll walk through hell itself to drag him back to you." Steele nodded, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. "Glad to have you on board, Perry. We've got intel that Gruss and his remaining forces have holed up in a fortified outpost on the edge of the system. We're going in hard and fast. You up for a fight?" Ralph grinned savagely, checking the charge on his rifle. "Always am, Colonel. Let's go introduce ourselves." The Terran fleet tore through space, Ralph's ship nestled in their midst. The outpost grew in their view screens, a sprawling complex of domes and gun emplacements dug into a rocky moon. The Lemnorian ships rose to meet them, a ragtag collection of battered frigates and fighters, the dregs of their once mighty armada. The Terrans struck like lightning, their beams and missiles ripping through the Lemnorian formation. Ralph dove into the fray, his ship darting between the flashes of exploding ships, his guns spitting fire. On the moon's surface, the Terran ground forces surged forward, their exoskeletons shrugging off the desperate fire of the Lemnorian defenders. Ralph landed amidst the chaos, charging into battle alongside his new allies. The outpost fell within hours, the Lemnorians no match for the Terran onslaught. Ralph and Steele stood amidst the smoking ruins, their armor scorched and dented, but Gruss was gone, his personal ship missing from the hangar. Steele's face was a mask of cold fury. The coward fled, but we'll find him, even if we have to tear apart every system in the galaxy. Ralph nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. I'm with you, Colonel, to the ends of the universe, if that's what it takes. Gruss doesn't get to live. Not after this. The hunt was on. The trail of Admiral Gruss had gone cold, until a shady contact on Necron's grime-encrusted streets spilled a critical lead. Gruss had hired the Crimson Skulls, the meanest mercenary outfit in 10 systems, as his personal guard. Colonel Steele slammed his fist on the briefing table. If Gruss has the skulls in his pocket, hitting him head-on would be suicide. Ralph leaned back in his chair, a wicked gleam in his eye. So we get someone on the inside, someone Gruss won't see coming. Steele's eyebrow arched. You volunteering, Perry? Ralph's grin was all the answer he needed. With a few calls to his underworld contacts, Ralph secured a meeting with Krav, the Zorganian warlord who led the Crimson Skulls. In a smoky dive bar, Ralph spun a tale of betrayal, claiming the Terrans had double-crossed him. He wanted payback, and what better way than to join up with Gruss? Krav leaned forward, his reptilian eyes glinting. You got guts, human, but guts ain't enough to run with the Skulls. Ralph met his gaze unflinchingly. Then let me prove myself. The initiation was brutal, a bare-knuckle brawl against the Skull's toughest bruisers. Ralph took his lumps, his face a mask of blood and bruises, but he gave as good as he got. When the dust settled, Ralph stood victorious, earning a nod of respect from Krav. Over the next few weeks, Ralph rose through the ranks, his combat skills and tactical savvy impressing even the hardened Zorganian. He learned that Gruss was holed up on a fortified asteroid, protected by a small fleet and an army of Lemnorian fanatics. Ralph passed the intel to Steele, who began assembling a strike force. But just as the Terrans prepared their assault, Ralph's cover was blown. A suspicious Zorganian, a rival from Ralph's mercenary days, recognized him and sounded the alarm. Ralph fought his way out of the Skull's base, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. He stole a fighter, racing back to the Terran fleet with warning on his lips and a prayer in his heart. The endgame was approaching, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The Terran fleet tore through the void, a wave of obsidian daggers aimed at the heart of Gruss's stronghold. Ralph gripped the controls of his fighter, his eyes locked on the looming asteroid base. The Lemnorian ships hung in space, their running lights dark, their crews caught unawares by the sudden assault. The Indomitable surged ahead, its prow glowing with barely contained energy. With a silent command, it unleashed a barrage of graviton torpedoes and plasma beams. The Lemnorian ships shattered like glass under the onslaught, their hulls crumpling and venting atmosphere into the void. Ralph wove through the debris field, his fighter nimble and responsive. He targeted the asteroid's defense grid, strafing gun emplacements and sensor arrays with precision bursts of plasma. Explosions bloomed across the base's surface as its defenses crumbled. On the ground, Colonel Steele led the charge. His powered armor absorbed the impact of plasma bolts as he waded into the fray, his rifle spitting death with every squeeze of the trigger. The Terran soldiers swarmed over the base like armored ants, their weapons cutting down Lemnorian defenders with ruthless efficiency. Ralph set his fighter down in a hangar bay, the landing struts absorbing the impact with a jolt. He leapt from the cockpit, his rifle already in hand. He moved through the chaos of the battle, his aim steady, his trigger finger sure. Lemnorian soldiers fell before him, their chitin armor no match for his armor-piercing rounds. He pushed deeper into the base, fighting his way towards the command center. Colonel Steele and his squad joined him, their armor scarred and scorched, but their resolve unshakable. They breached the command center doors with a shaped charge, the explosion ripping through metal and circuitry. But the room was empty, the consoles dark and lifeless. Ralph's eyes fell on a single blinking message on the main view screen. Gruss's face, twisted in a sneer, filled the screen. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over," the Lemnorian admiral hissed. The message cut out, leaving only static in its wake. Ralph slammed his fist against the console, frustration and rage warring within him. Gruss had slipped away, fleeing to some bolt hole to lick his wounds and plot his revenge. Colonel Steele was already issuing orders, his voice calm and controlled over the comm. "Secure the base, sweep for survivors and intelligence. We'll find Gruss no matter where he runs." Ralph's comm pinged, a private message on a scrambled channel. He opened it warily, his eyes widening as he read the contents. Coordinates to a remote planet and a single word: trap. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of a plan. Gruss was luring them in, using the Crimson Skulls as bait. It was a desperate gambit, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war. Ralph sprinted through the base's corridors, his boots pounding against the metal deck. He had to warn Steele, had to stop the Terrans from walking into Gruss's trap, but as he burst into the hangar bay, he saw the Indomitable's engines flare to life, the fleet preparing to jump. They were already in motion, charging headlong into the jaws of the trap. Ralph gritted his teeth and climbed back into his fighter. If he couldn't stop them, he'd just have to make sure they came out the other side. He powered up his engines and rocketed out of the hangar bay, racing to join the fleet as they plunged into the unknown. Ralph burst onto the bridge of the Indomitable, his face grim. "Colonel, the message is genuine. Gruss is setting a trap." Steele's eyes narrowed. "Then we changed the plan. A small team to infiltrate and gather intel." The Terran dropship sliced through the planet's atmosphere, scanners locked on the massive energy signature below. Ralph gripped his rifle as the ship touched down in a narrow canyon. He and Steele moved out, picking their way over jagged rocks and through tangled underbrush. As they crested a ridge, Ralph froze. In the valley below, a vast armada of Lemnorian ships stretched as far as the eye could see. Crimson Skull fighters darted between the larger vessels. It was a force to eclipse anything they'd faced before. "We're outnumbered 100 to 1, Ralph muttered. Steele's jaw clenched. "Numbers aren't everything. We hit them from within." They crept to the edge of the Lemnorian perimeter. Ralph primed the explosives while Steele uploaded the viruses into a maintenance terminal. Alarms blared as they fought their way to the flagship's hangar. But Admiral Gruss was waiting, flanked by Crimson Skull elites. "You've meddled in my plans for the last time," he snarled. Plasma bolts filled the air. Ralph ducked and rolled, his rifle barking. Beside him Steele charged, a Titan in black armor, scattering Gruss's guards. Ralph and Gruss traded blows, fists and feet hammering against armor. Ralph staggered back, blood in his mouth. Gruss pressed his advantage, his chitinous fists a blur. But Ralph was faster. He ducked a punch and drove his knee into Gruss's midsection. The Admiral doubled over, and Ralph brought his rifle butt down on the back of Gruss's head with a sickening crunch. "Ralph!" Steele's voice was strained. Ralph turned to see the colonel slumped against a bulkhead, his armor rent and bloody. Gruss's guards lay unmoving at his feet. "Finish the mission," Steele rasped. "Save our people." Ralph nodded, his vision blurring. He dragged Gruss's unconscious form to their ship. As they blasted away from the flagship, the explosives detonated. A chain of fireballs consumed the Lemnorian fleet. The viruses took hold, weapons and engines failing. The Crimson Skulls scattered, fleeing the carnage. The Terrans had won, but the cost... Ralph guided the ship back to the Indomitable. Medics rushed to meet them, but for Steele it was too late. Ralph stood on the bridge, numb, as the crew celebrated around him. They called him a hero, but the victory tasted like ashes. The Terrans had freed the galaxy from Gross's tyranny, but the price in blood had been steep. And in the quiet of space, Ralph couldn't help but wonder, had it been worth it? He stared out at the stars, cold and unblinking. The war was over, but the scars it left would linger. The fight for peace, Ralph knew, was only just beginning. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.